Hello and welcome to Michael Pepper Tech live roundup of the week or weekly roundup. Let's take a look at this and we will take a listen and get things figured out. And let's talk about some topics this week. So, first topic on the board will be the iPhone 16 Pro Max. I almost wasn't able to get one. And what do I mean by that? Well, I am a Spectrum Mobile customer and I'm part of their anytime upgrade plan. And with that, I've already done it once where I swapped out the Pixel Fold for an iPhone 15 Pro Max and then the Z Fold for an iPhone 15 Pro Max for my wife, with the plan that when the 16 Pro Max came out, I would just swap out my 15 Pro Max for the 16 Pro Max a couple months later, since I got my 15 Pro Max a couple months ago. When I went to them, it turns out that they basically couldn't figure out what the problem was and told me, I'd have to wait 3 to 5 days. I still haven't heard from them, and that was a week ago. About a week ago. It was last Saturday. And so we ended up going to Verizon, getting a line with Verizon and adding a 16 Pro Max on there. That kind of brings us to the next topic, that Verizon is cheaper than T-Mobile. What a surprise. And what do I mean by that? Well, in order to get unlimited data, which, realistically now with all of Verizon's plans, it's the amount of hotspot that you get that kind of makes a difference over that. Excuse me, let me take a drink here. So the amount of hotspot is really what matters. But for a single line or even two lines, Verizon is either on par or cheaper than T-Mobile. And you don't have to go to their top end plan to get truly unlimited data. And you do have to step up to a higher plan to get some of their phone deals. But what I figure is if you do that, rather than just paying on the device, it kind of balances out. And so if you look at their plans, yeah, you can maybe get a slightly better deal, but the plan will be cheaper or more expensive by the amount that the device is cheaper. So in the end, it kind of balances out, maybe a $10 difference at most. And so for me, I would rather be paying on a device and paying that off rather than have credits that I lose at some point. One way or the other, you're still going to have to pay a device off. You're still going to have to pay what's remaining and save overall and not have more data than I need. Related to data and speeds, Spectrum Internet increased my internet speeds without telling me. And basically, I woke up the other morning and decided to check my speeds, do a speed test, and was getting 1100 megabits per second, supposed to get 940. I was getting between 11 and 1200 down. Upload speeds have been slowed down a little bit. I was getting 45 when I was supposed to get 40, and now I'm getting around 35, which is what it's supposed to be. Now, I would rather have parallel speeds. I would rather have faster upload speeds and a little bit slower download speeds. If you're in the comments, let me know what you think about that. Would you rather have faster upload or faster download speeds, or a balance? Would you take a hit and lower like 1 gig down to 500 meg to get 200 meg upload speeds, or how would you handle it? The next topic we have here is iPadOS 18. What a mess. So Apple basically pulled all of the betas for iPadOS 18 due to them bricking some of the iPads, in particular the M4 iPads. Now I'm on iPadOS 18.1, which from everything I've read is not an issue, and it's just iPadOS 18. So be careful, be cautious, and keep in mind that an 18.0.1 update should be coming probably the end of this week or beginning of next week. Now, I have no way of guaranteeing that, but from what I've seen and from past history, they're quick to push those 0.0.1 updates to fix these issues. So I would just stay on whatever version of iPadOS you're on and not update until that issue is fixed. Stay tuned to social media and news sites to fix that. So I would like to take a minute to welcome some people as they come in. Hey, Tana, how's it going, sir? Been a while. I see you're up to some new stuff, up to doing your audio stuff and covering some music and audio creation tips and tricks and kind of talking about news related to musicians and different things. And so, Taylor, how's it going? Yes, I am reading the chat. So I've decided to do something a little bit different with how I do these live streams so that they're sort of educational and entertainment, and then I take gaps to read the chat. So that way the train of thought is kept in motion and provides that value to my viewers when they click on a live stream later and I can take clips from it. So that's pretty amazing. Yes, sir. I've been producing music for over 20 years now. I knew that, but you were doing some tech stuff. And so it's good to see you do things that are more in here in your heart and less stressful and easier to flow and entertaining and provides that sort of feedback rather than kind of maybe pushing yourself to do things that aren't as interesting to you. And that's one thing that I've discovered lately with doing tech content. So the next thing I will cover here is that the Tab S10 Ultra was announced today, and I said, do I care? And I think it's great to see the competition, but they did it as a press release, and I think that that is an error given that they're using a MediaTek processor, which they haven't used before. They've used Exynos, they've used Snapdragon. But they're using a MediaTek processor, and I think the major improvement is the anti-reflective coating. I wish that the screen would get a little bit brighter for outdoors. I think that's where Apple has the advantage with the iPad still. 1,000, 1,600 nits in HDR content, 1,600 nits, SDR, 1,000 nits. If you're outside, it gets really bright. And their displays are reflective, but you can get a screen protector rather than paying extra money or maybe upgrading from a Tab S8 Ultra or S9 Ultra. And things like decks I've seen are launching faster, but to me, I don't feel like, and that's probably why they did a press release, that it's enough of an update. Most of my issues have been software, and they're talking about and pushing AI, and we'll get into that discussion in a little bit later in a later topic. Next thing to touch on here is the iPhone 16 series cases. Is the cutout an issue? And I would say, no, it's not. I would say that when you're talking about using a case, because there is a slider there, as long as there is enough of a groove to get your finger in, and I can kind of show here, you can zoom in, flip it to the rear or zoom in and zoom out perfectly fine. And it's not as big of an issue as it was with the action button, where the action button was small, and even if you have kinda smaller fingers, you're trying to, like, get your pinky in there to hit it, and you gotta press and hold, and so the tricks for that is that as long as the case is not super bulky, and I even have, like, rugged case here, this, rugged case from Poetic, and their cutout is deep enough that the material is thin enough that it doesn't get in the way there. And so to me, that's not really that big of a deal. What's more of a big of a deal is lack of MagSafes, considering that Apple improved and increased the MagSafe this year, increasing the speeds on it to 25 watts, which is more comparable to regular cabled charging speeds. So as we see Belkin and some companies upgrade their devices and their chargers, that will be nice. And I don't get why people are making such a big fuss about it unless it gets in the way. And I think what more gets in the way is that if you don't, one of the tips I can tell you here is if you go into settings and into accessibility and camera control, there are some options, and I can show you guys real quick here. So if you go down below general accessibility, scroll down and camera control, you'll see there are some settings there. And if you set it to light press and then light press force down to lighter, and then keep the double light press speed as default, it makes it way more sensitive and it makes it easier to use. So that would be what I would suggest doing. It's not the cases getting in the way, it can be the software. Camera control, not just the shutter button. So right now, people are comparing to using like the Sony phone, and it's not just a button, and it's not shutter button, and it's not just a way to, activate the camera it's got the actual being able to switch through settings and scroll through things. And yes, there's on screen. But I think the significance is for people who are visually impaired, having a physically tactile button. And if you have haptics enabled, you'll see as you kind of move through things, it changes pace and gives good haptic feedback. And so on screen is hard to just hit and know that you're actually holding it down or that you're hitting the right thing. Or with this, you can kind of be more accessible with it. Let's take a minute to welcome a couple people. So Tana says, by the way, bro, I hit 14,000 subscribers this morning. Truly humbled and thankful. That's awesome. I'm finally kind of working my way up, getting subscribers, getting views, balancing things out. I think I pushed too much content recently, and YouTube kind of got confused and has withheld videos. So I'm going to, um, I'm going to work on that. So that's kind of what's going on with that. Lewis, how's it going? So I feel like the other thing that's left out, and we don't talk about devices for what they're going to be, but I will say that for the most part, a lot of companies have kind of kept up with the promise. Sometimes it takes a while. Google with some of their stuff took like a year for like their enhanced zoom and video features and things like that. But Apple is known to do this in the past, especially with camera features. We had like some of the night mode, dark mode features in the past where it combines images to give a better quality. That took them months to release, and they're talking about releasing some of these features as it goes. And I'd rather have them do it in layers rather than pushing it out now and have it being broken. But one of the things they showed off was being able to press the camera control button and go into visual intelligence and be able to use it's kind of like Google's version of image search, where basically it can tell you what an object is. But Apple's been doing that in photos for a while. If you go and you have a photo of a flower or, something like that, if I go into my photos here and let's say I wanted to know, let me find a picture of a flower. If I wanted to know, I should have had this ready, but if I wanted to know what a particular flower was, I have these flowers here. I can hit the little icon and it tells me right there that those are plantain lilies, which is correct. So they've had this image search stuff for a while, and with dogs and it telling you what kind of dog it is, being able to grab text from like a menu or a sign and hours out of it, and the phone number is things that have all been integrated there that they're just bringing forward that have existed before even Google was doing some of the image search stuff. And what's really interesting to see is that they will allow you to reach out and use Google's image search if it's something that can't be on device. And I think that speaks to Google's prowess, but it also speaks to Apple really saying, like, hey, we have these companies that we can work with that have these tools and allow it to expand beyond what's on device and be able to reach out and utilize those features. And, we saw them talk with Apple Intelligence and about um, using like Chat GPT and some third party sources there for it. And so this is just another way that we're seeing them recognize that Apple's not gonna be able to do everything because they're not a search engine, and they can do a lot of things on device, but then you Google search things, right? Or you're not using Bing, you're not really using anything. And probably partly the partnership that they have with them where Google pays them money every year to be the default search engine, then they can work with Google to optimize this for other utilities. Something that's kind of interesting is you can use Gemini on your iPhone if you launch the search app. If you launch Google, the Google search app there, you'll see up at the top, you hit this icon and you can use Gemini to search for things. And Google did say that they will be bringing, and you can do Gemini Advanced, that they will be bringing Gemini Live to the iPhone app in the near future, and to not rule out other features coming in there. We all know how Google Photos adds like the Magic Eraser feature, Magic Editor, and a lot of the other features. If you have a Google subscription, Google Cloud subscription, you get access to those things for Google Photos. So, the next topic that we are going to talk about relating to that is AI, best to be used as a tool and not a replacement. I feel like there's such a danger, and especially as I'm teaching my son and homeschooling him, for the young generation these days, I'm 34, but like for my son's generation and even some college students now to use AI to write their papers, and now there's software that's being used to reverse search to make sure that they're not doing that. But you have to really have an understanding of the topic or the subject or whatever you're using it for. If it's photography, if it's to, help edit photos, you still have to have a basic understanding of what's good and what it's doing. Or if you're using it to create code to help you write an app, you have to understand what that code means to be able to alter and fix things and not just give it a blanket access to what you're doing and say, like, do it for me and it's going to be perfect, because it's not. It's really a basic outline of a starting point for where you go. It's your base coat of paint, but you still have to understand if you're going to go over that primer with multiple colors, you still have to understand how to cut in and how to roll and keep the textures equal. It's an assistant, not a replacement. As Tech for Your Needs said here, AI is an assistant and an aid is fine, not to complete your work. And I completely agree with that, especially as somebody who went to photography, studied criminal justice. I mean, think about the fact that not in real stories, but in TV shows, there's been software that's used where it scans people's faces to narrow down the suspect pool. But there is a racial bias in this. Even at one point, Amazon got in trouble because Alexa was being trained and the input it was being given was racially profiling and racially biased and was making um, racist comments or replying in such a way that was rude or providing inaccurate information. And so part of that, it has to do with light. These cameras that are out there in the streets don't capture enough light. And so if there's darker features, it's not able to discern the textures and differentiate faces. And even people with beards, that can be problematic. Our phones will trip up on us and make us have to put in a new pin, even though Face ID is doing this 3D mapping. Sometimes you shave your face, you get a different pair of glasses. This device that we have in our hand every day that's supposed to know us doesn't know us. And there's people relying on this software out there, and it's just dangerous. And so on the next topic with that, that's really personal to me, is that photography as an art and a science. And what I mean by that is, while it's an art, it quite literally is a science. If you were to Google photography, is it a science? It will pop up and tell you it's an art and a science. It's literally capturing light. It's graphing it, which means to draw. It's drawing with light, and it's doing it on a sensor, whether that's digital Or we had things like film, like sheet film. People are still using film. There's actually companies that are now making um, squares for using like in old Brownie cameras and things like that that are coming back. There's this kind of rad along with vinyl records that are coming into play again. And so we have to understand that it's not just the fact that it's considered an art, but it's also a science, which means that understanding the authenticity of what you're creating, the realism, the fact that photojournalists are out there and they're able to capture images with their phone. But what's problematic is you have to basically, you would have to set your phone into an actual raw mode now. One of the things when I was taking my photojournalism classes, now mind you, I finished the photo program in 2013. So you're talking about, 11 and 12 years ago when I was in this program, but things have still stayed the same is that for photojournalists, they have to vouch for the authenticity. They have to show unedited proofs of their photos and show like I did not alter the story. Even with a crop, you can change the way that a story is. You can't adjust lighting. You have to show the story is true and then you're not trying to alter or slander anybody. And that's something that with everything being able to edit in photos and you're able to remove things from scenes and add things in or select a subject and tell it to change it to something else. I mean, imagine somebody claims they were bit by their neighbor's dog and they're able to edit a dog into video footage. They took video of the neighbor's dog running in the yard and they're able to edit it and make it look like they were attacked. And then they show up at the hospital and say, here's the proof. There's a danger when it comes to the idea that AI is being used as a substitute for originality and replacing just what's in here and the creativity. If you really want to have true art, something that benefits us all and can teach us and that's profound and that's beyond maybe beyond thought, that makes you really think, what does this mean? You still have to have a person because everybody's individual. Software is only as unique as the individuals that created it, which is a minor subset of those training the algorithms or the people that software is trained on is a fine subset. It's not infinite. It's not undefined. And emotion is something that software and hardware just cannot understand. Even the enunciations get messed up. I've used personal voice on my iPhone, which is a feature where you can say phrases and then you can type in text and have it say it as though it's your voice, but it doesn't necessarily understand enunciation in there. When you're saying questions, it will bring in kind of the change in voice, like instead of being like, let's say with a question, would you like a fried egg? Or would you like a fried egg? Or would you like a fried egg? Like there's different sounds to it, which can be excited or questioning, or it can just be monotonic. And that can be problematic for this. So, why technology matters so much to me is that while it's great and can be used to teach, it can be used to inform, it can be used to be able to take old images and touch them up and bring them back to life. It can be used so that somebody who wants to learn about photography or understands framing and some of the basics can improve their skills. But also it can be used as a replacement, and I want to teach people that that is not something that you really want. That before long, how do we keep away from replacing us? Imagine the day where I just have videos of me and somebody can pretend to be MPT. Let's say I had, get to the point where I have 20 million subscribers someday, some successful business on here. Somebody could take my image and use it. And then I have to prove that I didn't give permission, and I have to prove that's not me. And people can do deep fakes and do all sorts of horrible things with your image, but they can also do great, beautiful things. Keep your memories, store video. All this content that's on my channel will be here someday. Let's say, 70 years from now, I've passed on and my son wants to know and wants to see what it was like when I was creating this content and have those memories, he can look back on it. And so we should create beautiful memories, but real memories that are in the moment, silly faces, people with their eyes closed. Try to get people to pose. If you want their eyes open, them smiling, do that. But capture the moments, the authentic moment of the mom holding their child for the first time, or dad holding the child up out and just praising the creator of humanity for this beautiful, bountiful life that he has and for what's in his hands. Art is something that comes from within. Education is something to expound upon, to learn, and to pass down the knowledge that we have onto the future generation. But it isn't something where somebody should be allowed to fake things or steal information from people. And that's the danger. As more technology is allowed to do more, you're allowed to do less. And that's the thing, if you think about it. The more you allow technology to think for you, the less you have to think, the easier you are to trick, to manipulate. And that's problematic. We have concerns when it comes to, politics, when it comes to falsifying information, when it comes to violation of our First Amendment right to freedom of speech. But when it comes to truth, truth is perspective. And if your perspective is narrowed by what you have access to and altered by what is spitting out the most information, there's a problem with that. And that's my concern when it comes to this idea that what's in our pocket is such a great tool, but that's what technology should always be. And I hope that's what it always is for you guys. And I hope that when you're looking, for these thoughts and that when you're looking for cases and accessories and you're looking for ideas, that my channel is the channel that you come to for that knowledge, for thoughts like this, for maybe things that make you think different, for things that make you question the way that you're using your technology and question the permissions that you give them, and maybe look into the transparency from these companies. And you look at like Telegram and their CEO getting busted, and discussion of where they're selling your data to governments in other countries, and you look at and you wonder why maybe Apple isn't pushing certain technologies as fast as they are. Well, they have to have permissions in the countries to use that. But at the same time, sometimes those countries request information from Apple, and Apple has to say no and figure out a way to get your information and keep it safe, so that when the FBI says, hey, we want your information, and you're thinking, I have nothing to hide, it doesn't matter if you have anything to hide. As a great person once said, they don't have to look for a busted taillight if they can create a busted taillight. So it's not about, did I do something wrong? It's about, can they use that to try to find something to sculpt it, to make it look like you did something wrong. It's the question of, a few years ago, we had issues with this debate where Apple was scraping your data to determine if you were uploading inappropriate material to the cloud, where you and they were going to scan that to say like, hey, we don't want that on our cloud, but then they would flag it and eventually the FBI would get that. Well, fault markers happen in there, and that's the concerning part, that this software has no way to know what it should flag and what it shouldn't. And human oversight is a necessity when it comes to technology, not just on the company side. We ask that they protect us. We ask that they don't give up our information, but we give them our information, and we have the right and the responsibility to do the same thing when it comes to the information they're providing to us. we have the responsibility to look at what we're being fed and look at, is it dangerous to us? What do we need to protect ourselves? What information is real? And to do the research and not just nihilistically accept that it is what it is because Apple said it is, or Google said it is, or some search said it is. We're allowing AI to be like the next Wikipedia. We just trust it, but we have to understand the sources. And when you're in school, you have to be able to quote those sources for a reason. And I hope that doesn't go away. And none of this is like a fear tactic, but it's an education tactic. It's an intellectual tactic. And it's a discussion that I feel like is missing in the tech space, and something that I can uniquely provide with it being able to express intellectually and verbally the thoughts and construct this together in a way that hopefully helps people. And you don't have to understand it entirely, because I can kind of take it from complex terms and make it simple for the layperson, for the general person, for the public to understand. And that's what's unique in my mindset of how I approach things, is uncomplicating technology and terminology. And hardware has mostly become understood and uncomplicated, but the new directions that these companies are going into software makes it very complex, because it's not something you visually see all the time. You see the user interface, but do you see the code? Do you see what's in the cloud? Do you see what it's giving access to? Do you see where it's reaching out? Do you see what it's uploading, downloading from, how it's processing the data, how it's feeding you the data? No. So do your research, come here, listen to these discussions, subscribe to the channel if you're new, look to access for information, because as we have been given more information, and that provides a greater breadth and a greater expansion to more people who maybe can't afford to go to college, or who in the past were living in areas where the schools are just not so good. You can be your own educator, and you can be your own spokesperson with the device that's in your hand, and you can use what you learn to inform people. And that's why technology matters so much to me. It's a way that we can be informed, and that this is not something that you should be scared of, because fear is just a lack of information. And so for me, being informed is just something that's necessary. It's why we teach our children that the surface of a stove is hot, or to put on sunscreen so you don't get burnt, or to watch before you cross the road and double check and triple check and not just trust the lights. That's one thing that, if you think about it, as we drive down the road and we see a green light and we're headed towards it, but you got to look off to the sides, the other directions, to see that people aren't approaching that intersection and just going to go through it. You're at a stoplight and a stop sign, and you're sitting there and there's people all around, and there's this kind of code for who goes first. But trust is something earned, not blindly given. And that's also why I think a lot of us choose the technology that's in our pockets. Why I choose to use an iPhone. I have not had Apple show me that I couldn't trust them, but I've had other companies lose my trust. I've had Samsung try to tell me they didn't receive a device. Almost every single time I've traded in a device, they've tried to pull something on me, and I say, I have video and I have photos, and I have proof from FedEx that it was received at you guys, and it shows the weight, and it's no different from my end. So you did receive it. This is something that, I don't speak about this because I'm just trying to get you to subscribe, because I want you to subscribe because you want to. If you're new to the channel, if you're coming across this live stream, if you're not subscribed, I want people to come here every Thursday to feel informed, educated, happy, come away from this hour or so that we talk with something new, some new thought, something to come back to me maybe the next week and say, you know what? I didn't think about that. Or, you know what? Have you thought about this? Because this is an interaction. This is not just me talking. This week it kind of was. And that's kind of the layout of things, is talking about certain topics, because I want to keep the train of thought so that I do not waste your time. So I'm not repetitive, and to bring it back to you guys and to allow some of your thoughts to come in. Just like Michael C says here, what about Battery Gate? They did. They paid off. They had to pay a lawsuit because they weren't letting people know what they were doing. But it wasn't really that they were doing anything to get you to buy a new device. It was the nature of the battery. So they, in order to not have you all of a sudden lose battery life, were slowing down things, but they didn't get an option for you to say, you know what? I got 80% of my battery. I was getting 10 hours before. Just let me have 8 hours now and still go full speed. And that was not right of them. And that's something that, I wasn't making YouTube at the time, wasn't making videos, but I would have called them out on it. And I've called them out on other things. You're releasing a device that some of the features have trickled down to my 15 Pro Max, but right now it's the camera control button that really allows expansion. I'm going to talk about how that benefits you even without the Apple Intelligence stuff. But could they have waited a month or two and dropped phones when that was ready? I guess. But again, how would they have the feedback then? Because the 15 Pro Max doesn't have that camera control button. The 15 and 15 Plus doesn't have the action button and the camera control button, and doesn't have the A18 processor. So by them putting this out there, they're kind of treating you like a beta tester a little bit, but not really. They're seeing what they are people that are installing the beta who chose to say, I'm okay with whatever issues come arise, and developers wanting to make sure their apps can work on it are beta testing it. And they're doing that now rather than, Apple's able to do certain things in lab and able to, you know, look at that and go, we're going to make it work. But then when it's finally released, we've seen what happens in the past. Sharkfin says here, not just Battery Gate, but, Ben Gate, Antenna Gate. Apple has many scripts over the years, no fluffs, no passes. Yes. So yeah, the iPhone 6, it was bending, it was super thin. That was a error in their engineering and not thinking about the fact that people were going to put this in their phone and maybe their phone in their pocket and maybe sit on it. So then they released the 6S and the 6S Plus, and it fixed that. And now, going from that on to the future, there was an internal frame to increase the structuralization and the structure strength of how well your phone holds up. And other phones started adding this stuff as well, because devices getting thinner and thinner and using different materials and going away from plastic and glass and materials to being able to be thinner and dissipate that heat more and thinner around it so that they can increase the battery without making the device super thick. And then the battery's gotten thinner, but that also means that the chemicals are reacting more closer together, creating more heat. That's some of the things. Antenna gate, yeah, the antennas were placed in the wrong area. So if you're holding it just right, especially with the left hand people, they were blocking that. And Apple said, hey, put this case on or put this on, and it's interesting. It's interesting to think about. Uncle Cease's battery gate was legitimately duplicitous fact to this day. Part of the agreement, they know I'll give people the option to turn off throttling, but almost nobody knows about it except for nerds. Yeah, it's in the battery settings. So that's the thing, though. Like, I haven't had a device long enough to know. I'd be curious to know. I know Samsung got in trouble for exaggerating water-resistant claims around the same time, bad commercials where people would swim in chlorinated pools near the ocean. That's still an issue. IP rating, they're talking, if you're going into a pool or salt water, that will degrade that seal over time. But unless you live in an area like I do, where I'm in Michigan, surrounded by the Great Lakes, that's an issue. They could put a coating over all the internal parts and really waterproof these things and seal these in, and they have done a lot better, like, the speakers have, like, a internal gasket that seals them off. But um, that's the issue with it is and, on similar note, Samsung got in trouble where they had the gaming optimization software where basically they were throttling their chip down unless you went in and toggled on to give full speeds. OnePlus has a like a mode to toggle on to give their tablets and their phones a full speed. Samsung used to have multiple speed options, including one that was like a performance mode. But now they don't even really do that. They just out of the box give you a certain function, which might not be 100% of what that processor can be doing. We've seen some of the tests for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 4, but then we've seen the tests from like the OnePlus 13 leaks and some other devices where they've shown the speed tests. And it will be, 70 to 80% of what that chip can really do because they have to throttle it. There's only so much capability that can be done within the thermal envelope of what exists in this small device in your pocket. And even if you put a vapor chamber in there, it becomes heat soaked. And so they have to slow down that curve about at what point it can reach that temperature and make it more gradual to it and then maintain it and then cool down. And it's not going to be able to maintain the whole time that maybe your phone battery does. And then that heat, where does it transfer? It's got to dissipate still. So if there's water in there that's able to cool faster than air due to like a higher density, but that has to still dissipate out through it somehow. So it's going to dissipate either through the screen or into your hands. And so all of these companies are really doing things through marketing and they're very careful. And clearly they have great legal teams that look at what terminology they're able to use, at how they advertise things. But some companies are more transparent about an upfront, like, hey, this software isn't out right now, where others are kind of like, oh, the new whatever coming with this AI feature as though it's already going to be there, or, hey, it's going to be released, but then a year later, they, is when they actually drop it. And that's problematic for me with the idea that, you're releasing hardware and then you take a year to actually release the software that you claimed would come with it. And, we see the companies talking about 7 years of updates, but does it matter if you're going to take a year to even bring you're releasing a version the software, or the updates are so minimal, the changes are so minimal now? I think that's why they're able to do 7 years of updates, because previously from 1 year to the next with Android, like Android 8 to 9 and 9 to 10, started the year over year changes were more substantial. So 3-4 years, those changes are more significant. So now if it in 4 years is a double from 4 years ago to, like, let's say from the Pixel 8 to the Pixel, let's say 9, 10, 11, 12 is a doubling in performance, where sometimes it would have been like Pixel 8 to Pixel 10 would be a doubling in performance. So now Pixel 8 to Pixel 10 is a doubling in performance, and then maybe 10 to 14 is a doubling in performance. So that's 8 years. So by the time, you're talking about 7 years, maybe it's only a fraction of that. I'm not giving actual numbers in that their performance changes, because more likely it's only a 10 or 15% per year. And so in 7 years, you're going to have a doubling, where before we were seeing stuff where the RAM was being increased and things like that. The reason 7 years is important, because now if you sell your phone after 3 years or give it away, it isn't going into landfill a second or third life. Maybe, but here's the issue with that. Can the hardware even hold up? So if you look at it, the approved degradation of battery is 10% per year. They're saying that at 2 years, if you deplete your battery, basically 1 charge cycle per day, approximately, a 400 charge drop in a year should deplete about 10%, and 2 years should be about 20%. So by the time you go to sell it in 3 or 4 years, you might have half the battery, but are people going to pay to replace the battery? Are they going to go to an authentic servicing location? Google doesn't even have physical stores except for in a couple locations. So where are they going to go? Is it even going to last that long? People are keeping their phones on average about 33 months, just shy of 3 years. But then they tend to just pass it down, or they buy a new phone and they trade it in. And those companies use it for parts, and then everything else gets scrapped. So yeah, these devices will still be fine, but I don't see that you're going to sell somebody a phone in 3, 4 years, and and maybe they'll do it because it's like, oh, it's still got, but are these people who are buying these even going to know or even going to care that it's going to get another 3 or 4 years updates? If the phone's scratched to hell, if the screen's broken, if battery life is degraded so much, if some of these upgrades are adding so many features that it's basically the kitchen sink effect, where everything's been added to the point where you're now, even if you repaired the battery, maybe you're going to get 80% of what you were getting when it was new, if you're lucky. Is the hardware going to, affect it? You can replace the battery. The idea is that you get a new phone because your battery is depleted is pretty sparse. That's what most people do. Like, I know a lot of people that are still using older iPads, even that have lost software features, because they went and just plug it in. But they'll upgrade when the battery can't last any longer. Same thing with like smartwatches. Talking about, it's being conditioned by the OEMs. What's funny about that is that year over year, devices, well, specifically the iPhone, is getting easier to repair. This year, they're actually using a specific adhesive with the battery. That basically, you hook a 9-volt battery up to it, and it releases it and makes it easier to repair, getting higher repairability than previous models, the way that they separate things so that the back is like one piece. So if you break it, you remove the whole thing instead of removing the part around the camera separate. But who's doing that? Even if it was super simple, people just are unfortunately treating this like, oh, it's spoiled milk or whatever, and I need to buy a new one. But some people keep past, because as long as so on the Android side, one thing that's a little bit unique about that, and it's beneficial, but it's also not so much, is that app developers don't have to upgrade their software to the newest stuff for it still to work. So I could have an app that's been on the Play Store for 4 years and it's like not been updated for Android 14. It's maybe it wasn't even maybe even longer. Maybe it's Android 8 based stuff and it'll still work. So you end up with a bunch of broken apps. So now when they're adding on to like you're going to receive more updates, I hope that means that Google is going to enforce some rule to push app developers to have to update their apps. It's funny that Apple had the advantage in software updates. Everybody said long-term software support was the best thing ever. Now that Android has take a lead, it's excessive and needless. I think mostly because, again, there was no push. Apple, when they release new software, they give developers a set amount of time where they have to update their apps to support the newest software to make sure that all security patch flaws are used, new APIs are used. But on the Android side, what difference does it make if your apps are still going to run the same as they did, maybe broken, maybe don't get updated because the developer went away and they're not getting kicked off the Play Store and other developers don't try to create a different version of it, or they can't because they're worried about getting sued or whatever. So, if you take care of hardware, it's going to last 7 years. I hope that I have a laptop that lasts 7 years. As I point out, my Note 9 and Pixel 3 are going to be on their 7th year soon. Yeah, my desktop computer was built in 2018, so it's going on 6 years, going to be 7 years. But some of that's different. Like that's plugged in. Laptops, a lot of the older laptops at that time, you could just take the battery out and slot it in. But you're not talking about a device that you're trying to protect from moisture and IP ratings, and a device that you're taking apart and it's compact, and you're not talking about a device. You're talking about laptops and computers that have fans in it to blow the heat away. You're talking about where Windows, changes their operating system every so many years. It's not every year that you get a new version of Windows. You're not getting new features constantly. The way that smartphones operate are completely different from the typical computer, even the way the apps are pushed. And that's what's really annoying to me is like the Play Store just finally got the ability to update multiple apps simultaneously. Huawei was doing that somehow, bypassing it years ago. So we need to see, that companies care, and we're not even seeing them make it to the first year sometimes with this promise of that features are going to be added. Samsung slowed down their release. It took them a while to put out 6.1.1. One UI 7.0 beta was supposed to be coming out, and then they've halted that. So they say years, and then they'll say so many security patches. But what if it takes them 2 years to fully develop so you're going to get the same number as if you were promised 3 or 4 updates before. If it takes 2 years to get, you're going to get the same number of versions. They're trying to do too much, and it's becoming problematic. The API don't change, the operating system change on, and the developer may need to change their function calls. Yeah, except for there are new changes to some of the camera APIs and things like that change, and like access to the cameras, certain features, if there are certain hardware changes that I've made, security functions. And if you're not forced to update the app to support that, then the OS is getting the updates, but your apps are still flawed security wise. And then it's on the operating system to make sure that bad actors aren't able to get through those apps to it. So then these security updates really matter. And sometimes they'll be giving fewer security patches in there with some of these companies. I I want to see that they make it where it matters, and they make it where you don't have to be like, oh, the operating system, if I stop getting operating system updates. See, the easier solution for Google would be to say that the developers have to update their apps, because then it doesn't matter as much how quick can non-Google Android phones get access. Samsung and Google basically are pushing up updates really quick. OnePlus is a little bit right behind them. Some other companies are months later. Tablets are quarterly updates, sometimes twice a year, sometimes not very often. Most of the phones that people are buying, though, it's problematic because they're buying the cheaper devices that aren't getting those updates, though. That's the thing. If that really mattered that much, then why is it that Samsung's A line that's not getting as many years of updates are the ones that are selling the more? Because they're cheaper. If Google really cared about the security and about the features and about the things like that, then they would require that every app be updated to it. So if they don't require that, then what's the truth in it? They're doing it as some empty promise that's not going to affect most people. What's it going to affect? A few percentage of the people that are buying the higher end phones? Samsung sells, 200 million phones, but out of them, what is it? Maybe let's say 40 million of them are the S line, and maybe a million flips and folds. So by the time it's done, you're talking about maybe a third of the devices or a quarter of the devices are even going to benefit from that. Google Pixel doesn't sell a lot of devices. So the operating system is just half of what matters. Look at what's on your phone. Look at the operating system when you buy a new Android device. Look at how much space is taken up before you even install anything else. The default apps that are on there by the company that sells it, guaranteed all those apps are going to get pushed updates. Google's going to want to make sure their apps are updated and secured, because if they don't, they get sued. Samsung, same thing. But if when you get a device, it's 20 gigs is taken up, and then you have a 256 gig phone or 128 gig phone, and let's say you have a 128 gig phone and it starts getting full. That means you have 100 gigs of data that's photos and videos, but then take out the photos and videos and look at just the app install data. Look at games. Look at how apps are getting bigger and bigger themselves. I would guess that about, a majority of the data that's on your phone isn't required and enforced to be to the newest secure wise, to support the newest operating system. Probably why Google just announced that they're going to make installing third-party apps like APKs more difficult to sideload, starting with Android 15 with some of the things in there. And probably why they're saying that they're going to stop scanning those apps and saying like, hey, if you install an app from third party, we also won't auto update. It's going to be on the user, because Google needs to remove their liability from that, because they're scanning it, but it doesn't matter because they're not saying like, here's our requirement. They're just saying, oh, we haven't found anything. But if their standard is allowed to be such an old version of Android for what it can support as the baseline, that's problematic to me. That's like if Windows Vista allowed most of the things that Windows 11 did. And so Microsoft was like, sure, we're not going to update our apps. And then there's some security flaw that keeps getting passed on from generation to generation. I don't understand why these companies, like, none of this matters if you're not making it all matter together. If one little part of what combines, so the sum of the parts is greater than that of the whole, is an important meaning. To me, with this, if you think about, you have the operating system and then you have all the data you put on it and you have the apps. They control the operating system, but are they too scared to tell other companies that they need to make sure their apps are updated? Do they think they're going to lose them? Because if you think about, people argue all the time that the app quality on the iPhone, those apps are better. Yeah, because they're required to be updated. Partially. But on the Android side, I would say that for the most part, a lot of apps are getting better quality, are improved. Developers are having an easier time with making apps to work on both sides. But at the same time, paid apps, most of the time, people are not paying for apps on the Android side. The amount of money that people spend on an iPhone, on an iPad, on Mac for software is higher per person, per capita, than on an Android device. Partially, like I said, people are not installing stuff, but when they do, are they looking for the updates? No. Most people I know are using cheaper devices. They don't even necessarily go on and look. I have a lot of people in my life that I've had to inform, like, hey, you have an update for your phone. You might want to install that because there's some, security issues and there are some features that have been added. So the problem is, you can tell people as much as you want that these things are beneficial and that you're going to provide so many years or so many version updates. But if they don't really benefit the user by making things better, by adding features, and features that are meaningful to the day-to-day life to everybody, and it's just a subset, then what difference does it make? And if it's not improving security, it's like me saying, like, let's say I told my wife, oh, we're buying a house, and we get there and the house is the same size as our apartment. The only thing it's done now is I'd have added expenses of having to maintain that, of having to replace the water heater, replace the roof, insure it for injury. If somebody comes on my property, gets injured, I'd have more expense but no benefit. So what's the benefit if these companies are not pushing the new stuff out there and requiring it? So that's the question I have with that. Hi, BG. How's it going? Hi. Hi, Devin. So that about wraps it up for this week. It has been an hour and 3 minutes and so. If you came in late, watch the replay, got a little ranty, but started off discussing some of these topics. And that's the functionality of things when it comes to how these live streams are going to be each week. I'll have some topics. I'll do a few topics, and then I'll kind of talk to the audience, and I'll do a few more topics because I don't want to devalue your guys' time, especially, people replay. I want them to get the gist of what's going on in a short amount of time and then kind of expand upon it. So this has been Michael Pepper Tech Live. I want to thank people for coming through. Thanks, Sharkfin. Thanks, Savage. Thanks, BG. Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, Devin. Thank you, Michael C. Thank you to Tana, who was in here, and anybody else and Taylor, and anybody else who came on through to watch. Thanks to the replay crew. If you are part of the replay crew, put that lovely red pepper down in the comments down below. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, smash that like button, and I will see you all next week with another Michael Pepper Tech Live weekly roundup. Peace, love. See you in the next video. Peace out, people.